Welcome everyone. I have some creepy, disturbing stories for you guys to listen to. With that said, if you guys do enjoy, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy. It was my freshman year of college. I had went away to Iowa for school. It was my first time being away from home, and not knowing a single person, besides my ex, who decided to go to the same school as me. My school had the football players move in earlier than the rest of the freshmen, and transfers, and so the football players were around helping people move into dorms. I had one guy helping my family, while my mom's sister and I went to the finance aid office to sign some paperwork. Jumping to when classes began, I was a music major at the time, vocal performance to be more specific. My classes were very jam-packed, and a strict schedule, so I could fit it in times to eat. This will be relevant later on in the story. A kid in my class was taking up some of my voice lessons time with the teacher, so I told him I'll just bring up the homework to the cafeteria after my lessons. He agreed to it, so we exchanged social media, so I can let him know when to meet me. I don't ever give out my number to strangers. After my lessons, I ran home to change into some sweats. This is important, so keeping this in mind. I had did this before going to dinner. Fast forward to dinner time, and I had met up with the kid at the cafeteria. I gave him the homework and we parted ways. I ate, and then I went back to my room to do homework. My roommate was at a study group, so she wasn't home. Well, about 5 minutes after getting home, he had messaged me on Snapchat, and he asked me for help with the homework. I told him to send me his questions via Snapchat, and I'll try to help him that way. He insisted I came to his room, even though I protested about it. He eventually stopped messaging me, so I assumed he was over it and would just leave me alone. Well, about 10 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. He randomly showed up in my dorm, though I never told him what my room number was. He pushed his way in, so I agreed to help him with the homework. And then I said he has to leave. He said okay, and so we just set up at my desk now. I sat as far away as possible from him, while still being close enough to help him. After a few minutes, he had put his hand on my thigh. I asked him to remove it or I'll tell him to leave. He removed his hand for a few minutes before then putting it back. I stood up and then I went to walk away from him, but he had grabbed my wrist and then pinned me on my bed, which was right next to the desk. He then ripped off my clothes and I remember hearing the tear of the fabric. Then, not going into detail, he raped me. After he was done, he grabbed his stuff saying he was ready to go. I walked him out because I thought I would get in trouble if I didn't. Because it was after hours where we had to escort people walking around the building. As he was leaving, he actually said that it was awesome for him. I just went back to my room and just laid there, staring at the tiles on the floor, while crying. My roommate got home and I had tried to tell her what happened, but she didn't care enough to stay awake and listen. The next day, I woke up late for class, so I didn't get to shower. This will be important, as you may know. If you shower after, it can wash away evidence. I rushed to get ready and go to class. I had this class with him yet again, so I sat away from him on the completely opposite side of the room. He actually had the audacity to message me on Snapchat halfway through the class, and I lost it. I grabbed my stuff and I ran out of the room. My friend at the time had talked me into going to the dean. The dean was helpful at first, but then after a while he told me I was just trying to ruin his life and football career. Even though he raped me regardless, they said they would have to call my mother and tell her, and I panicked because I hadn't even told her yet, so I left the dean's office and I went to call my mom, and my mom convinced me to go to the hospital. After I told her that I hadn't had a chance to take a shower yet. My plan was to do it as soon as I got off the phone with her. Fast forward to the hospital, and my roommate came with me with the rape kit, stated there was trauma in the lower region of my body, as well as an allergic reaction to the latex. I didn't notice he used. My roommate was there with me the whole time. The cops came in and they sent male officers into my room while I was having the vaginal exam. The officers asked me what I was wearing and what did I do to provoke him, which led me to start crying and shutting down. They then told me they didn't think anything could be done, and they even asked me if I felt uncomfortable enough to message my rapist, telling them that what he did to me was wrong. I got hysterical at this point, and the doctor, who was already upset that they sent cops into my room, told them that I needed to leave. That's when my roommate left and then took the cops to gather the sweats that I was wearing when the assault happened. When I got back to campus that night, I ended up moving dorms the next morning. I went back to the dean with my roommate and asked for an order of protection against them. They did give it to me, but then I was the one taken out of my classes while the school did their investigation. By this point, the attacker found out where my new room was, because he was entering the building when he wasn't supposed to, and he had made friends with the girl across the hall from me. I would come home with things written on the dry erase board that I had on my door, calling me a liar and a bitch and much more. I ended up having my first suicide attempt after 6 years clean of self-harm. My partner, who was just a friend at the time, had sat outside my room until I would open the door for him and show him I was okay. He brought me all of my favorite snacks and some flowers. I moved yet again. Where I moved to was a very closed-off area. Most people didn't even know it was a hallway, because the door that closed off the hall looked like a janitor's closet. Important to note, I didn't tell anyone where my new room was, besides my partner, who was with me all the time, and my friends who didn't associate with anyone. I used to be friends with them, but then I found out that when the police confiscated the clothes I was wearing, they also took the clothes he was wearing, and the condom he used that he kept as a trophy. However, with all this evidence, the police still dropped the charges. Though, because there wasn't enough evidence, the school investigation was even worse, because it ruined my life more than this. Not only did it take me from my classes, but it ruined relationship with friends, etc. I eventually had to close the school investigation because it was starting to impact me academically. But by then, I was already failing most of my classes beyond repair. He then started to stalk me wherever I went, taking videos and pictures of me, and sending them to my professors, saying that I was lying to the point that they asked me if I can get over what he did. If he just apologized to me. He again found out where my new room was, and he tried to get me in trouble with the RAS by saying I had things on campus that shouldn't be on campus. The RAS came into my room at 4 a.m. I don't blame them for this because they felt horrible for it, but they had to investigate the accusations, and they searched my room, tearing it apart. One night, my partner and I were hanging out with some friends when I got a text message from an unknown number, and then a snap from my old roommate, the one who was with me when all this took place. My rapist was now dating my roommate, and he had sent me a video of them having sex. I flipped out, and I took it to the dean the very next morning, and they wouldn't even reopen the case. I completely blocked out everything and everybody I hung out with when I first got on campus. The rest of the school year went okay because of this, but at the end of the year, I went home and had to take time off school because my GPA was so low due to failing those classes, and I had to go to community college before I could enroll in another university. All that being said, I don't want anyone to think of me as a victim. I'm healing now, and I'm still with the same guy 7 years later. We're actually getting married in October 2025. I'm also finally about to graduate with my BA. I did change my major to English though. So many good things have happened to me since then that have helped my healing process. I also had trauma before this, because my father is very abusive, but that's a story for another day. Who knows, maybe I'll share it one day. If you can take anything from this story, let it be known that you can heal from whatever trauma you go through. Warning, this story is extremely dark, so trigger warnings for sexual assault and suicide, as well as prescription medication. I feel like enough years have passed that I can write about this. I can finally get through without breaking down the story. It's about Crystal, my soul sister, as well as Becca. I met her in elementary school in about 1986. She was a quiet kid, and I was too. I think that's why we clicked so well. We became fast friends. She always got bullied in school, and I always tried to look out for her. I accidentally broke a boy's leg once when I shoved him for picking on her. Life got a little more complicated as we got older. Her dad was a functioning alcoholic, and her mom struggled with mental illness. I reckon that she had shock treatments at some point, and was never the same. I was told that, and I never asked anything more about it. Her brother was a real piece of work, who ended up doing some sketchy things to her, and we were absolutely terrified to tell anyone. And it kept up. The things that did happen really messed the two of us up, and even to this day, I'm still affected by what we saw, as well as what we were forced to do. Counseling has helped me come to terms with everything that has happened. In 1997, we were in the 9th grade. Her mom got a new apartment. It had door locks, and it seemed to be safe. She was so excited, and she had begged me to stay over. We were under the impression that her brother wouldn't be there, and we had a great time. We dozed off, probably around 11 p.m. Several hours had passed, and it was nearly 2:17 a.m. when I was then startled awake. At first, I wasn't really sure what the heck was happening, but then I realized someone was on top of me. There was a hand clasped over my mouth, and a knife to my throat. It seemed like time had stood still. I completely dissociated, and I mentally blocked out what was happening. It was painful and rough, and I wasn't strong enough at the time to fight the person off. I was beaten and bruised and violated. I just acted as if I had passed out. He must have been convinced or satisfied, because I then felt him walk away. I already knew in my heart what was happening next, and there was no way I was going to let her brother do that to her again. I waited until his back was turned, and then when he was starting to do unspeakable things to her, I grabbed the butter knife off the dresser that we had previously used to prop open the windows. All the pain and hurt that I was feeling went into just savagely jabbing him and stabbing him. I got him about 7 times before I had the crap knocked out of me. I was jolted away by paramedics giving me the smelling salts. I felt the IV getting jammed into my arm. I remember hearing the medic tell me we were safe, and that we were both going to be okay, and then we'd be off to the hospital in no time. There was a lot going on around us the entire time we were separated, and we both had to have stitches and had a sexual assault evidence kit. I felt so dirty and ashamed. I was also extremely terrified that I was going to jail for stabbing him. I remember crying and apologizing to the cops. It looked as if she was going to bawl with me. She held my hand and assured me that I had not defended us, we wouldn't be here. He admitted to saying that he was going to destroy us and do much damage to our insides as possible. Court happened and we both had to testify. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, and he had to register as a sex offender for the rest of his miserable life. We both received heavy therapy and counseling. High school came around, and I ended up at a different high school than her, but she eventually came to my school in the 11th grade for a year. I was still her friend, but not as close. I didn't want to think of it or even be reminded of it. I just focused on school and work. I was working all the hours I could after school, so I could buy my first car, a 1987 Buick Regal, souped up with slamming sounds, and I got my first place. I graduated top 15% with straight A's, as well as honors. Crystal and I drifted more over time. She had 2 kids, and she eventually got married to a scumbag. They had made some bad decisions together. When I talked to her in 2002, she had just lost custody of her 2 boys. They got adopted out. I ended up having my own children and moving out of state to get a fresh start. I went to college to become a CNA, and then a phlebotomist, and I became certified to give hospice care in 2014. She had reached out to my parents as they were always good to her. She had another son by then. His name was Jesse. She was really struggling a lot, and I let her back into my life. I moved in with her, and I helped take care of her boy. By this point, Crystal was heavily addicted to Xanax, methamphetamines, and pain medications. I get it. She needed to numb herself. She's always went big and never felt numb enough. By Christmas of 2014, she was on a downward spiral, and I knew it wouldn't end well. The last day I got to be with her was January 5th, 2015. She had asked me to watch her boy while she went to McDonald's. She returned 2 hours later messed up, with no food. She was staying with her mom and her boyfriend at the time. They had previously taken her medication away, to give it to her as needed. She couldn't handle not controlling her medication on her own. It was absolutely clear she was on something when she came back. I later found out that it was oxy and fentanyl. She was snooping and unfortunately she found her medication. She handed me a handful and said bottoms up. I yelled at her and I took away her medicine bottle. I let her mom know and then gave them back her bottles. She wouldn't let us know how many she took, so I always kept an eye on her. At one point, she got up and she was wandering around at some point, and I thought she was good, but what I didn't know is that she took a large amount of narcotic pain medication, as well as Benzo's cold medicine, Adderall, and anything else that she could find. I ran to her room to check on her after feeding her son, and mine. I heard noises coming from her room, gargling and thrashing and pounding. I slammed open the door and then flicked on the light. She was blue-lipped, foaming at the mouth. I went into action and I called 911, but I then passed it off to someone. Tried to clear her airway. I sucked out a bunch of foam, which I now know was medicine, and started doing CPR for 5 minutes. And she was getting bluer. There was no respirations, and I felt her ribs break. I kept on, but I eventually stopped. She went from rigid, then limp. I knew that I truly lost my soul sister. I remember being pulled off of her, and being told that I did everything I could. They asked a lot of questions, and it was honestly way too much for me to process. I got arrested for disorderly conduct that night. Also, Jesse, her son, ended up going to live with his dad, John, who had stepped up, and is still a close friend to this day. It's obvious Jesse was really affected by it. I watched the soul get crushed as there was nothing I could do for him. During this time, he ran away from his dad just last year. I shot him a text just to make sure he was okay, and make sure he's eating, and see if he's okay on money. He usually responds, but it never gets any easier for me. Inside I know I'll try to make it up to him, even though I can't. I hope his life is full, and he finds happiness. As for me, I was just staying numb, just working in an autopilot. I finally got my own life together, and I got off benzo and opioids. Cold turkey on May 29, 2018. I was definitely given a second chance, and I'm extremely grateful. I only wish that my soul sister could have had one too. Rest in peace, Crystal. This happened to me a few years ago, probably back in 2017 when I was 14. I still think about this encounter almost every day. My dad lives near a small lake in Wisconsin. There are about 100 people who live in the neighborhood. My brother and I spent every other weekend up there, so we knew pretty much everyone. My dad's house was the second house to the top of the large hill. At the very top is a gas station, and the diner, where I'd work over the summer. At the bottom of the hill was the lake and a small beach. That morning I was waitressing at the diner, and at the end of my shift, I bought a slushie from the gas station, and was planning on going down to the beach for the afternoon. Parked outside the diner was a gorgeous teal vintage car. I'm not sure what brand, I'm not good with that stuff, but it seemed to be from the 60s, and it caught my eye. There was an older man in the driver's seat, and his wife was in the passenger seat. They had their windows up, and I wasn't too close, so I didn't get a great look at them, but I did notice they were looking at me. I didn't think anything of it, and started walking home. On my walk home, I remember wondering where they could be from. We don't get many tourists, and I would have remembered if someone drove a car like that. The diner was off of a pretty quiet highway, and it was rarely used by out-of-towners. But I assumed they were just driving through. So my younger brother and I went to the beach that afternoon, and hung out for a few hours. When we decided to head home, I packed up my stuff probably a minute before he did, and started walking before him. On the walk up the hill, there was probably half a city block distance between us. He could clearly see me, but we were too far to talk. I heard a car coming towards me, and looked back, and moved to the side of the street. It's the car I saw earlier at the diner. They slow down as they approach me, and I start to get nervous. The woman in the passenger seat rolls down her window, and I nearly shit my pants. They both seem to be wearing hyper-realistic latex face masks. There seemed to be no beginning and no end to the mask. There weren't noticeable holes for eyes. yet their eyes definitely seemed real, and there was no seam at the edge of the neck. If they were wearing masks, they were some of the best masks I've ever seen, and must have cost a fortune, but it definitely wasn't their skin. There's no way. Something about them was so off. The woman asked me for directions to a highway I've never heard of. I didn't drive yet, so this in itself wasn't weird, but I pointed them to the highway by the diner that leads out of town. They thanked me, rolled up the window, and drove away. I ran to my brother and told him what happened, and he said they looked pretty normal when they drove past him, but they looked normal to me that morning as well. The masks were too good. You had to be close enough to notice how strange they looked. There was just something so unsettling about them. They didn't really do anything odd, except asking a girl who was clearly too young to drive for directions. But it was a very small community. I might have been the first person they had seen in hours. It was just the way they looked. I've never seen anything like it, and I haven't seen anything like it since then. I mentioned it to my dad when I got home, but he didn't have much to say about it. I still feel deeply unnerved when I think about it, more than 6 years later. I don't believe in much of the paranormal stuff, and I do think they were human. But why the masks? What were they doing there? And why ask a child who's obviously too young to drive for directions to a highway? Has anyone ever experienced something like this before? Thank you all for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed those stories. With that said, I hope you have a great weekend, and as always, stay depraved.